All right, guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about whether you should craft the leadership gloves or the leadership boots to pair with the leadership pants for archers. Up until the leadership gear came out, I think it's widely accepted that you just craft the 6-piece Dragon's Breath, which is a archer legendary set, and call it a day, right? Once the leadership set came out, some content creators were like, hey, maybe the leadership pants are the way to go just because it gives health, whereas if you craft the Dragon's Breath pants, it actually gives attack, right? So at this point, I think it's pretty settled. At least most people would agree that you do actually at least want to do 2-piece leadership. You could either do 4-piece Dragon's Breath, or you could even do something like a 2-2-2, which is 2-piece leadership, 2-piece Dragon's Breath, and then you actually craft the KBK weapon and the helm, right? So today we're going to talk about the leadership part. Okay, so personally, I crafted the one on the right. I crafted the Dragon's Breath boots and the Gauntlets of the Glorious Goddess, which is the gloves, right? And together they give you 13.5% defense. Whereas I've seen some content creators even recently advocate the one on the left, which is advocating the 6% health on the boots plus a 7.5% attack. And when I saw it, first thought was maybe I messed up. So I decided to dig a little bit more into this and then present my findings and then use numbers to back it up. Okay, so right here, this is what I was just talked about earlier, right? If I asked you at first glance, would you rather have 6% health and 7.5% attack or 13.5% defense, which one would you pick, right? Because that's really the choice you're making. Yes, I know there's a little bit more where you could get the iconics and everything else. But that number is actually pretty negligible. I'll go over why in a little bit later, just because when the stats get that high, right? So this is the T4 base stats plus the bonuses you get from like Alliance, your personal technology and everything else. When you're talking about a little bit of extra, say like health defense, so a 3% base defense on the gloves here versus 3% more attack. If anything, it will actually skew it more in the favor of this, but that percentage is almost negligible, so I'm just not going to talk about it. Just know, but if you actually add an iconic, the stats will be a lot more skewed. Okay, so the formula I use to calculate this is courtesy of Wick Gaming. The guy's a legend. I think from his findings on Rage, talking about stats, he actually posted this formula on like his fifth video that he's ever posted, which is crazy, right? And he really changed how players view the game, meta strategies and everything else. And it's too bad that he actually retired. I would actually really would have liked to play with him and actually see him make more videos, right? But anyways, as far as I could gather, Lilith never officially released their formula of how attack, defense, and health interact with each other. I don't know how this guy did it, but he actually figured out this formula at the bottom and then used it to reliably calculate how much damage is taken based off of number of troops, total attack stats, defense, and health, right? So the part that really matters is this part here, because everything else, if you multiply it by 2 or you multiply it by like a square root of something, right? It's the base percentage that you're going off of is still going to stay the same. So like whether you multiply 2 or another number, right, it's still going to be a factor of that. So don't worry so much about the other stuff, just this base formula right here. Okay, so you've probably heard before that health is better than defense, is better than attack when you're looking for equipment. It's not necessarily that health is better than defense. It's just that when it comes to like technology, even like crystal tech and everything else, you're going to get a lot more defense and health, right? So if you look at this T4 here, this is a screenshot from my archery range, right? The additional stats you get from defense is 188. And the additional stats you get from health is only 126, right? So that's like a 62% difference, right? And you're just not going to, from your equipment, you're going to get 62% more health and defense. So you're always going to have less health and defense because of that, right? And now that shows up in this formula, right? Because if you plug it in, so imagine if you're taking your defensive stat, your defense is at 50, your health is at 50, and the enemy's attack is at 100, you plug it in, that means you're going to take 400 points worth of damage, right? Now, if you still have 100 points, so here you have 50 and 50, here you have 20 and 80, and I actually purposely skewed it so you have more health. So you're actually doing 80 health and 20 defense, and you plug it into this formula, right? You're actually going to take 625 points of damage. Now, 625 divided by 400, that's actually a 56% increase. So even though the stats add up to 100, when you have it skewed and it's not balanced, the stat becomes a lot less effective, right? So the goal when you have defense and health is to actually balance it out. Ideally, it's 50-50, just like this. This way, you're actually maximizing the statistics, okay? Attack is a little bit different. It doesn't factor into that. I'll cover this more. The reason why attack is less important, in my opinion, is because, one, attack actually scales off of troop types, right? So the number of troops you have affect how much you attack, right? If you lose half your troops on the field and you're still fighting, you literally you're pumping out half the amount of attack. I think anyone that's like done a duel in KVK 1 or 2 where you're running a Richard and Martel, just because that March has a lot of stats and heals, and you're trying to, and then you duel someone else that also brings out a Richard and Martel, right? Starting out, you just do a lot of white damage, and as the health gets lower and lower, the damage output becomes less and less and less, and that duel, quote unquote, just takes forever. And that's actually what's going on there, because the defense number doesn't go down with a troop as their troop decreases. The health doesn't go down, right? But the attack, the amount of damage you're taking actually scales down dramatically as you have less and less troops, which is why troop capacity is also super important, because the more troops you have, the more it actually amplifies your damage. And as far as I can tell, when it comes to skill damage, right, it actually just takes a damage factor based off of this formula, and it pumps out a bunch of damage at once as opposed to white damage. So this is all courtesy of Wick Gaming. You can go look it up. Like this 5th video, I think it's actually a video on stats. He talks about this. And this is not a formula released by Lilith. It's actually a formula he figured out for himself. Okay, so hopefully it kind of took a tangent, but that at least gives you a primer on how stats work, right? So let's go back to the original question. Would you rather have 6% health, 7.5% attack, or 13% defense, right? And by the way, some of the tests I did with this, I tested it with equipment, without equipment, with different kinds of equipment that archers would use, just to see if it made a big difference. It didn't. The percentages all came out pretty similar, so I'm going to stick with that. Okay, so basically the test I did was you take the stats of set 1, right, which is this side, and then you take the stats of set 2, and then you run it against the same baseline enemy, which is going to have the same stats. So the stats would be different on this side. One's going to have more health and attack, and then one's going to have more defense, and then this one, it's just all going to be the same with just archer with equipment on it, right? And then you'll actually get 4 numbers. So this first number here will be how much damage this march, your march, takes. Stat with set 2 will be how much damage this march takes, and then the baseline enemy will be how much the enemy is taking, right? So you can imagine if you have a march with 7.5% more attack, right? One of them, the enemy is going to take more damage, right? Whereas like when you have one with more defensive stats, like 13.5% of defense as opposed to just 6% health, without the attack, the enemy is actually going to take less attack, right? So the findings, long-winded way of saying this, is that when you run the one on the left, right, so the one where you're running the leadership boots and the archer gloves, that march is going to do 3% more damage, but it's also going to take 3% more damage, right? So the question actually becomes, would you rather have a march that takes 3% more damage and deals 3% more damage, or takes 3% less damage, but also deals 3% less damage, right? So at first, you might be torn. You're not sure which one to go to. I'll actually make the argument for why you would actually rather have the one on the right. Okay, so here's the two sets of gears. By the way, just for fun, I decided to just run it, right? So if I, instead of 13.5% defense, if I actually just converted this to health, right? Obviously, there's not a gear that does that, but let's just say it wasn't plus 13.5% defense, it was 13.5% health. This March would actually take 4.3% less damage as opposed to like 3.08%, right? So that health instead of defense, 13.5% actually does matter. It makes about like a 1.2, roughly 1.2% damage taken reduction difference. Okay, so here's the pros for the gear on the left. In a short amount of time initially, you're going to have more punch, right? Just because you are going to deal more damage. And I would say the pros end there, just because if you remember, right, damage, the amount of damage you do also scales with the amount of troops you have. So if you're taking more damage, you're also going to drop your troop count faster and faster. And as you drop your troops more and more, the effects of the attack actually is less. So like in a way, you can make an argument that if you have high defense and high health, and you can keep troops for longer, you'll actually in a way also be able to attack and put out more damage for longer, right? That's besides the fact that if you are tankier and you survive longer, you'll actually be able to stay on the field longer, right? The number of sev wounds you take starts going up, like from 100 to 70%. The amount of sev wounds you take is minimum. From 70% on, it starts going up. It really starts climbing up when you get below 50%, and it goes through the roof once your march gets below 20%. So you can imagine, right? If you have a march that hits 50%, not only are you going to take a lot more sev wounds, which is going to drain your resources a lot more, but also because you're at 50%, you're literally going to be able to only put out half the damage that you were going to put out when you were at 100%. For most of the time, unless it's something very, very critical, you should not be having your march on the field once it gets to 50% and below, right? So if you can be tankier and sustain longer, you're also going to be more resource efficient, just because you're less likely to just drop all the way down with a weaker attack. You can actually sustain longer, right? It will allow you to get better trades. And then finally, because you could do all those things, you get a lot more kills, right? One of the benefits, if I had to put another benefit of sad facing, is that when you sad face, the sad face actually does go back to your city faster. So technically you could refresh and come out faster. But that's something that most players, unless you're like a super, super whale, I think you would actually prefer to have what's going on the right over here. Okay, so the conclusion I like to make is that for archers, you want to craft the leadership pants and the gloves, just because, yes, you take about 3% less damage. I mean, you take 3% less damage, and you deal 3% less damage. But overall, unless it's for like a single instance where you really need that punch, you're actually going to do more damage, be more resource efficient, have more sustain on the field, and it's just a better sell overall. Okay, so this one's a little bit nerdy, but I think it does provide some insight on stuff that I think a lot of players probably don't even know. I think older players probably know Wick Gaming. Newer ones probably don't. Highly recommend, again, you check out his channel, even though he's not posting on it anymore. But if you got any value from this, please like and subscribe to the video, and I'll talk to you guys next time.